So, Danny, we're just, as with any crisis, we're dealing with comms problems ourselves and making sure this works. I think we have got it working, but I'm very interested in your life and your experiences and the things you've done. Do you want to just go right back to when you were being brought up, and what shaped you as the kind of leader you are, and why have you been attracted to this kind of world with these big engineering problems, and you've worked in a lot of different engineering organizations. Do you want to just talk about a little bit about yourself, perhaps in 2 or 3 minutes, and what shaped you and the kind of firms that you've worked in and the kind of work you've done?
Well, I guess my interest in engineering and technology probably goes right back to being a child, really. I really like to put things together and take things to pieces. I think it was probably my grandfather that spotted that was who I am, and he was an engineer. So I think that was where my sort of early roots came from, and I also had a great love of people, especially practical people who are real can do, want to get stuff done, and engineering often brings a lot of challenges that require some can-do attitude and require some problem solving. So I think I just naturally found that was a place for me, and the people that I've worked with over the years, they've brought many fantastic experiences. The organisations I work for some fantastic organisations, all at different stages in their commercial development, and it's always been at the core is that sort of problem solving, that technology. Working with those sorts of people, which I absolutely love to work with.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we'll just pause and just ask Ben if Ben's had any questions yet, and if not, we can carry on with some other talks about dealing with crisis and emergency planning. Ben, have you had anybody ask any questions on this very first session? Probably a bit early, but we might have had one too.
Yeah. So yeah, just trying to get the questions up. So we've had a few people logging in and watching the videos. No questions that I'm seeing as of yet, but that may be due to our technical expertise.
Well, look,
so we're working through that.
Okay. Well, if people want to post questions up, if people want to post questions up, please do for Danny as we go through. Danny, let's go on to the kind of experiences you've had. As you say, big programs, big projects always go wrong. Things go wrong, and how have you seen it done well, and how have you seen it done appallingly badly, run over time, over budget, people didn't recover quickly? Just give us a few real life stories over, not only just in here, but in other, just tell about some of the other jobs you've done. What are the different, you've had some fascinating firms you've worked for. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be unfair to say that every project always goes wrong, because of course we're surrounded by some of the most incredible infrastructure in the world. The journey to get there is a tricky one. There's some really interesting academic research on how to improve the way we make decisions around investments. So I'm really interested in the philosophy and behavioural science of project management and how people make decisions, as well as the practical issues of engineering. So that side of things I've been doing a bit more.
And you're also at Oxford University in your spare time, doing a master's degree, aren't you? What's that in?
Yeah, so that's in major projects. I mean, it's there's a really a fascinating professor who specialises in trying to identify how major projects go wrong, why major projects go wrong, and what we can do to improve the planning and delivery of major projects. So they run a really interesting program at the business school there. So I'm very fortunate to have got a place, and I've been doing that for a few months now. I've met some really fascinating people, and it's really sort of opened my eyes up to the way that I make decisions, especially around biases and heuristics and those kind of things that we take for granted.
Tell us a bit about biases and heuristics. Is this the horns or halo effect that you have on people you're dealing with, or why you tend to go for certain options?
Well, I mean, there's an enormous set of reasons why certain decisions that seem like good ones on the day are then impacted. But in particular, you know, there's a book called Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow by a chap called Daniel Kahneman, and he talks about the way we have two systems in our brain. They're not sort of separated by biological function, but two systems in our brain. And often we find ourselves, we'll make a decision on the basis of the bias, and it could be something as simple as, well, I trust the people that have given me this information, therefore I might not have to do any of my own research to try and identify whether this is a good decision or not. And he talks about that risk and how in the past there were a number of issues that were more complex than it appears, and you should really go and do your research as to why was that complex. And they call it the hiding hand and the planning fallacy. And it's the assumption that, you know, the people of the past who went through all these challenges, we can learn a lot from the people of the past in all these challenges, but that requires us not to make automatic decisions as you would under System 1 thinking. You need to think deeply and do your research, and not just trust the sort of information you're provided, but go and make sure that this is enough intelligence for you to make that decision.
Yeah, very interesting. And what about some examples in your current role in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office Services, when you've had to deal with a crisis and get people out of different things? How have you seen people operate well as a team, and how do they handle an emergency well? And what are the lessons for people today from that?
Well, having spent a lot of time working with IT projects and IT programs, I mean, this is just a natural fact about IT. It goes wrong from time to time. And when it does, it's very visible to the people that need it. So really quickly it becomes a problem, especially to your customers. And so what I've tried to encourage is that we actually have a mechanism by which our engineers take the time out to do the analysis and do all of the relevant repairs that need to be done. And then the sort of customer and account management teams are actually engaging with the customers to make sure that they understand what's happening and why. So you sort of give the engineers the space to do their job without crowding their thinking with additional pressure, whilst at the same time making the intelligence as clear as possible to the customers so that they can actually deal with this situation. And there's been some really sort of complex situations where we've lost some very difficult platforms, and we've had to get them up quickly. And if you didn't have cool heads and you didn't have a systematic approach for managing these sorts of crises, you just make it worse.
Yeah. And how do you encourage innovation, creativity when people are right up against, they're in the forest, right up there by the trees? How do you get the leaders to step back a bit and think about the three most important things, or whatever it is? What have you found worked?
Again, it's like we talked about earlier. Often, if you've got a system and you've got a process, and you've tried and tested it with different scenarios, people naturally slot into those when the crisis hits. I guess you're trying to identify whether this is a familiar crisis or whether this is an unfamiliar crisis. If it's familiar, then you probably find you're more likely to recover the situation more quickly and more systematically. If it's something new, there's a lot more thinking and strategy that goes in as well. And also you have to be really careful not to overpromise or underpromise. There's a fine balance with your customers in terms of making sure that they understand the reality of what you're dealing with. Yeah.
And also, I imagine it's quite an interesting one about what you stop doing and what you must keep doing, because everyone wants everything. So how do you prioritize? What system have you used?
It's actually not my system, the particular one that I like. It's one that the Foreign Office have kind of established, which is at a time of crisis, when there is a huge amount of uncertainty. You know, what are the things that you can drop, delay, and do differently, so you can actually get right to the heart of the most important things that you need to deal with, and everybody kind of gets on that page. And you know, that's not an easy thing to do. It takes takes a lot of thought, a lot of decision making. But drop, delay, do differently. I've kind of translated that into my operations. I find it incredibly helpful.
Yeah, I love that. Drop, delay, do differently. It's really good. Really good little advice. I'll remember that myself. Just pausing and checking with Ben. Ben, have we had any more questions? Because if we haven't, we'll crack on. But have you got any questions come in from people?
Yeah, we've got a few people watching. Obviously, a lot of the questions are sort of moving towards the COVID-19 situation, and obviously we're not trying to give a solution to that current problem. So I suppose just sort of translating the questions that we have, what would be your sort of strategy and tips for coming out of a challenging situation and keeping a team motivated and moving in the right direction?
That's a good question.
Sorry, could you repeat the question? Had a bit of a Wi-Fi blip there.
Okay, no problem. Yeah. So what would be if you're looking at coming out of a challenging situation? What would be your sort of strategy for keeping the team together, motivated, and to be successful coming out of a sort of challenging time?
I think there's a lot to be said for appreciation and communication. As you're preparing to conclude the crisis, obviously you'll be thinking about what does return to normal look like. But throughout that crisis period, you'll be communicating with each other, communicating with your teams, especially if people are in remote locations. I think that's the one thing that can really complicate matters is if the communications is not clear.
That's a
you must have experienced sort of managing from afar and all those sort of remote locations all around the globe, which is really sort of relevant to how people are having to change their management style at the moment. Is there any sort of tips you can give on how to do that well and keep a team feeling like a team?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's technology today is great. It makes a huge difference. You know, I mean, I'm not sure it would have been as easy to communicate in the way that we do, share documents, share working practices. You know, virtual working now is light years ahead of where it would have been even 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And so, you know, getting people confident with the technology and getting used to that, I think that's made a big difference for us. As far as the team goes, I mean, we put lots of communication out to all of our staff, you know, to support them and to encourage them. We put lots of links to good government advice, especially around well-being. We've had some really interesting ways that people have been having virtual coffee mornings and people who are perhaps on their own maybe, or not surrounded by the family and friends that they would normally be around, you know, trying to make sure that we're reaching into those even out of hours, you know, even out of office hours, if that's appropriate to do so. So, you know, trying to keep that sense of community and keep the dialogue and also make sure we're giving good advice.
Yeah, we've got one question from Don McIntyre come in, and it's a similar line of questioning, but looking at actually bringing new team members into the team and sort of making them feel supported and welcome and get to work sort of straight away. Is there any sort of methods that you have of doing that?
Could I come in here, Danny? It's one that General Paul Nansen, who's going to be on our next week's session, the Commandant of Sandhurst, who's now GOC recruiting and training. He said what's so interesting now is when you've got people joining a training platoon, let's say a basic soldier training platoon, they'd wait till they arrive at the barracks and then they start from there. Now they're having to do it virtually, that the person is at home, but he's joined a virtual platoon. And they do things together, and their platoon corporal, who looks after the 8 of them in a section, he gets together with them all virtually online, and they do things, and they even all bring a beer along to the drinks at the end of the day at 5 o'clock, and they swap stories and tell things about each other. And then the sergeant looks after the 30 of them, and it's amazing what they're doing now. And he went, why didn't we ever do this before? We could sign people up before they ever even join the organization. They feel part of it. You're drawing them in.
Yeah.
And it's really working well. So sorry just to jump in, but Dan, this is your moment. What else do you think?
No, I think those are great tips. I mean, we've had a few people join us. You know, the nature of a large organisation is people are moving on and people are moving in, and we've had a few people join us, including new people into my team. And getting the tech working really fast was really important, as well as making them feel connected into the team. So getting them to introduce themselves into the team meetings early, and then spending a bit more time than I perhaps otherwise would, really explaining to them, you know, the information in the organisation, maybe giving them a buddy as well. I think that's been quite a helpful thing. Yeah. And then obviously when there are high points as well, kind of sharing those and explaining what they really mean and why they're high points. I think the more you can do virtually. One thing I would say it makes a big difference if you are in a place where you're now virtually working is get the kit working, get your tech working, make sure they know how to use it. Because the sooner they can do that, the sooner they can feel like they're contributing.
Yeah.
And people want to get stuck in.
We've had a similar thing even before this lockdown with COVID-19 and everything. We obviously are a global organisation, and how our leadership team stays in touch is they do weekly all hands where everybody's on the same call, and the new starters often get pulled up on stage, and they have to tell us something that's not on their LinkedIn profile, and then do their party piece or a skill that they'd like to show everyone, which, as you can imagine, sometimes they're brilliant and sometimes they are pretty awful. And our CEO sort of stands there with the people who are up there, and he's played basketball with them, dancing, all sorts of stuff. So it is quite possible to get that sort of connective tissue on a global sort of stage still. You're right, even with just the tech sort of working.
But while we're on with you, Ben, I remember when I was your visiting professor at CAS, and you were talking in the lesson we were doing on the Exec MBA about different practices in people getting their annual appraisals, and some said, "Oh, we do it twice a year," and you went, "No. We just do it in the moment." And don't you have an app where, you know, and even this was before, this is about a year or two ago, you know, you get feedback and after action review as you've done a meeting. Was that your organization or was it another one?
So that's another organization. We do a lot around, we acquired a company called Glint, which looks at employee engagement. Mm-hmm. So everybody, every quarter gets questions about how engaged they feel from leadership, management, all the sort of important stuff, and it sort of gives that sort of picture all the way up to senior management of actually how well is the sort of culture and values sort of permeating the whole company, and gives that sort of window into all the different offices across the world. So that's really sort of massively important for our organisation. Everybody starts to sort of live and breathe sort of good behaviour and sort of looking after each other.
What ideas come up for you, Danny? Anything else from just what we've been discussing? And some stories you could share about any of these kind of dealing with crises, what good teams do, and how to pass on good practice.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favourite things is meeting all the new recruits. It's great to be able to sort of, you know, talk to people about the really interesting things that your organisation does. And just go around the whole group and ask them what parts of the organisation they're joining. You know, they might be joining the IT, or they might be joining security systems or construction, or, you know, they might be doing logistics, or they might be working in procurement. You know, lots of different things, and being able to join all of those up together and explain why each of them matters and why it's important, and give them 2 or 3 different really fascinating stories that they might not otherwise come across. And just trying to encourage them to go and, you know, have a community around them, because once you sort of slot into your department, you know, you can almost live in that department and not surface from it. And I think if you don't surface from it and and engage with the rest of the organization, you miss some of the glue. So we run something called the coffee roulette, which is really interesting. I do it every month, and I never know who I'm going to be sitting down having a coffee with. And we're still doing it now, but we're doing it virtually.
Yeah.
So we're having a virtual coffee roulette, and so a name from in the organization comes up, and we just have a chat about all sorts of stuff. And it can be work related. It can just be chat about family and friends. It can be about hobbies and interests. It doesn't really matter. The point is we're a community that works for the same organization, and we've got interesting stories to share.
Yeah, and I want to follow on with that, Danny, because you're one of these leaders who thinks leadership is really important. And some organizations are going, oh, we're going to cut back on leadership in this crisis. We can't afford leadership. We're not going to do anything about that. But actually, it's more important than ever. And you as a leader are trying to role model, but basically, eat, move, sleep, breathe, focus, prosper, how you look after yourself.
Yeah.
Just give us some things of how are you running your daily routine so you keep your good mental health, physical health, keep connected with your family and your children. What are you doing? Just to give a personal example.
Yeah, so I am working from home mostly at the moment. I mean, I've had to go into the office a number of times, but I'm really trying to follow the medical advice that's been given and set the bar pretty high to say, look, if I don't need to come in unless it's for absolutely critical reasons, then that should be how other people are approaching it. We've all got good tech. We all know what we're meant to be doing. And I've actually seen some really fantastic management as well as leadership through this, where people are now having to manage tasking virtually in a way that perhaps they might have not had to do in quite such an accurate way before. So, but in terms of just generally leadership itself, I mean, there's much more to do now than there was before we all moved online. It's non-stop, and so typically. As Gold Commander, I'm up first thing. I'm checking into Gold Command. I'm checking into Silver. The situations from overnight comes in, and I'm reviewing all of the critical risks and the critical operations.
And Gold and Silver, it goes back to Cobra, does it? Because you're connected into a whole load of different organisations. Is that how it works? I mean,
yeah. So I'm connected into Bronze in the Foreign Office, and I run Gold for my organisation. And then we've got an established Silver, which has a big working group that feeds in from all across the world, all the different things that we've got going on. And within there, we've got divisional directors who are operating what we call Bronze. And so you've got an operating command structure that's a living and breathing command structure that's dynamically fed, but also it's communicating decisions. And then Gold tends to be more focused on major strategy, major risk, major complexity, major uncertainty, and communications in and out of other aspects outside of the organisation. So each of us has got very different roles, and so that's worked, I think, quite well. But we every day we're obviously talking. Every day the intelligence is coming through and the information, and every 3 working days as an executive board, we actually have just a sort of stock take, and we check in and find out, the plans that we had going into the week, are they working, and what do we need to tweak, what do we need to course correct on?
That's great.
So that's all been really really beneficial, I think, because it's every week is different and it's fast moving.
Yeah, fascinating. Thank you, Danny. Ben, back over to you. Any more questions from our audience?
So just a question from me, probably. We've got, I was just sort of listening to you talking about all those different bits of information coming in constantly. There seems to be so much for you to sort of process. And is that sort of like something that happens all the time for you, or is that of the moment right now, or that's just something you've got used to?
No, I mean, I think I have a uniquely interesting job. It's very busy. There's a lot to it. There's a lot of complexity and moving parts. So to that extent, I'm sort of constantly involved in innovation of one form or another. it's not as though we have a big manufacturing facility and we're trying to make the machine go faster. Actually you've got 4,000 or 5,000 projects a year globally in up to 300 cities around the world, and each one has got its own uniqueness to it. So actually it's got a very different set of complexities. But I think the big difference between family just coming in.
That's all right. Real life happens. We're making other plans.
Big difference between going to work in a normal circumstance and during this COVID-19 has actually been the fact that going to work now is mostly going downstairs into my study. Whereas before, as Jonathan well knows, I like to get on my bicycle, and I then spend the next hour cycling into work and an hour cycling home again. So I get a lot of time for thinking, a lot of time for exercise during that. And so the thing that sort of dropped out in the first week was doing any exercise. And in the last couple of weeks, I've actually picked that back up again, and it's made a big difference to my energy levels and my ability to think.
Yeah, that's very good.
Yeah, that sort of melding of the day on lockdown has been quite extreme, I think, for most people. So with the way your role, there's so much information coming in and things are changing all the time. That's probably what a lot of businesses and a lot of leaders are experiencing through this time. Do you have a particular sort of strategy of management to prioritize that information, to sort that information, to make the decisions, which have to be done in pretty timely fashion?
Yeah, I mean, we've invested in our top 100 leaders in the organisation to strengthen their resolve and strengthen their decision making as well. So this isn't just a handful of people trying to make decisions. We've got a whole community of people who are good at this stuff. So it is well spread out. So it tends to be things that are least certain are the decisions that we try to navigate our way through. They're usually quite well informed by the community of leaders in the organisation. So it's rare that you're trying to make a decision on something you don't truly understand. You're often trying to make a decision on something that's moving and changing, and at some point you've just got to make a decision. So I think because we're doing this executive dial-in every 2 or 3 days, just to go around and try and work things through. Anything that gets really stuck, we've got a bit of a clearinghouse. The other thing is we've increased the frequency of our boards and got rid of all the non-essential papers. So if it doesn't relate to where we are today and in the future, actually, we have to drop, delay, do differently to try and work out whether it should get the airtime. So we haven't been afraid to use an extraordinary board mechanism to process some pretty complicated things, and that's working quite well at the moment, I think.
Good. Ben, if I could just come in, I think if we start to come towards the end of our time, maybe, and I'm going to ask in a moment for Danny to sort of share his final top tip. But before we do that, Ben, is there any really cracking great questions that you have from people? That one last question that we could give Danny before he wraps up with his top tip on inspiring leadership in unprecedented times.
There isn't, but there's nothing that sort of cracking on there. But something that we discussed before we went live, I thought was actually probably quite good to sort of bring up. We spoke about actually what's been really inspirational for you during this time, and I thought your answer around that was something I'd like people to sort of hear, because I think that everybody's probably thinking the same, really. So yeah, Danny, what's been really sort of inspiring for you during this sort of tough time?
Well, I think I've seen huge levels of courage throughout. I mean, my organisation aside, I mean, we've got people all over the world trying to work on this enormous effort to deal with the situation of borders closing and flights being cancelled and all of the complications that go with that. And I think there's been some brilliance and some courage. And But really, what's kind of really bowled me over has just been the way our NHS and our medical frontline have, stood there day after day, performing life-saving duties, and nothing I could ever do would even come close to what they're doing. It's just incredible, and I'm so inspired by those frontline NHS workers, and it makes me feel tremendously proud to be in a country that's got people like that on the front line.
Yeah, and really adding to that, Danny, often the service that isn't often recognised is the police, and the other services, fire, ambulance, and workers who are dealing with people with health problems and things like that, caring and that kind of stuff. But I do think the police are doing an amazing job, and they're also taking their lives at risk. Like my stepson who goes in and there's someone who shouts, "I've got COVID-19," and does he have to touch him? He's got to arrest the guy and things like that. And so they're trying to keep the order as well. But with a nephew who is an intensive care doctor, the stories he's telling, this is not to be taken lightly. And anybody who thinks they can bulk up the rules and the guidance that we're getting, if you go into an intensive care ward and see the people who are dying there, then you'll wake up and think about it.
Yeah.
Danny, I just want to say thank you so much for everybody who's listening and the people that will listen to the recordings that we're going to have. It's great having you on the first episode. You are indeed an inspiring leader. You're dealing in unprecedented times. So thank you from us all for your contribution today.
Oh, thank you very much. It's been great to have a chance to come on and get involved with this. First one, I think, Jonathan, that you've done. It's the first one I've done, and it's been a great experience. Yeah. My top tip.
Mm-hmm. Your top tip.
So I think probably the most important thing is it's all about people. People will do remarkable things, and they'll look out for each other. If you can find different ways to tap into those incredible stories and learn what people are doing, and really celebrate that and share those stories with others, then you can inspire a great deal more people to step in and step up. So I think the most important thing in these times of crisis is all about the people.
Danny, thank you very much indeed. And we're looking forward to everybody joining us at 5 o'clock next Tuesday, when we're having Major General Paul Nansen, CBE, the former Commandant of Sandhurst. He's just handed that over, and he's still the GOC of training and recruiting, and he has also been to war. So a man who's seen many different situations and stays calm under pressure like Danny does. So Danny, thank you. And also Ben, thanks for making all this happen. And
thanks so much, both of you. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks, Danny. And thanks everyone that's been watching.
All right. Stay healthy, everybody.